That was true. Richie might have been big, but he wasn't stupid. Well, he was big and stupid, but the plan had been simple enough that even Richie could follow it without so much as a dress rehearsal. Contract gigs were often like that. Every step spelled out in intricate detail, paint by numbers. All you had to do was keep your brush within the lines. Bobby turned back to the storm and the waves and the boat. Yeah, I'm serious. This ain't the job, Richie tried again. Yeah, Bobby responded, but he was already reaching for the frame. Once that damn little voice started speaking, Bobby had never been very good at keeping the brush between the lines. Lack of impulse control. That's what the teachers and the priests and the social workers who were eventually called in had called it when Bobby was growing up in East Boston. Sometimes he just did things. Probably the reason, by the age of 51, his arrest record was as long and varied as his debt ledger. Bobby grinned as he drew his box cutter down the length of the canvas that was now splayed out on the floor in front of him. The feel of the blade against the painting was strange and unique. The chips and dust from the paint sprayed up against his gloved fingers, filling him with a sense of gravitas. He knew that paint was old, even older than the building around him, which itself looked like some sort of Venetian palace that had been airlifted out of 19th century Italy and dropped into a leafy suburb of Boston. But it wasn't just the age of the canvas, already halfway out of the gilded frame and beginning to curl up at the edges, like a bit of a newspaper held too close to a flame. Bobby knew that the decision he had made wasn't just spontaneous. It was, quite possibly, historic. He kept his knees steady against the bottom of the frame as he worked, ignoring the beads of sweat dripping down the back of his neck and staining the stiff collar of his borrowed police uniform. He could hear Richie's grunts as the bigger man worked on his own painting a few feet away on the floor. A much smaller frame, maybe 2 feet wide and tall, the canvas depicting some sort of 17th century parlor scene, involving a guy with a stringed instrument, 2 women, and a piano. It hadn't taken much to convince his partner to join in on the fun, once they'd gotten the big one off the wall. Richie had always been more of a follower than most of the hoods Bobby had grown up with on the streets of Revere, which was why Bobby had tapped him for the job in the first place. No matter how simple a gig looked on paper, there was always the possibility of unexpected complications. And the last thing you needed when things went off script was a partner who liked to think for himself. As Bobby slid the box cutter down toward the final corner of his own canvas, he finally surveyed the room around them. Off script was an understatement. It wasn't just the painting of the boat and the one Richie was digging into. There were now a half-dozen empty frames splayed out across the gallery, each beside a little pile of shattered glass. Some of the canvases were already rolled up and piled in a corner by the door, while others were still spread out near where they were working. Bobby didn't have tubes to put them in, but he had plenty of tape and zip ties in his duffel bag, which was just outside the Dutch room, in the second-floor hallway leading to the rest of the museum. Tubes would have been better. Christ only knew how much these things were actually worth. But the tape and the ties would have to do. This wasn't Bobby's first art heist, though it was certainly his strangest, mainly because it wasn't really supposed to have been an art heist at all. But he'd stolen paintings before, and he knew that art this old often went for millions. Then again, with paintings like this, it wasn't so much about how much they were worth. It was more a question of finding someone willing to pay for them. Even the most eccentric billionaire couldn't exactly hang a Rembrandt on his living room wall. But a little after 1 a.m., dressed as a cop working a box cutter through the last few inches of the border of a 400-year-old painting, Bobby didn't concern himself with potential next steps. One of the benefits of acting on impulse was you really got to feast on the moment. And looking across the violated gallery, it was clear that Bobby and his partner had served themselves quite a buffet. Bobby actually felt bad for the feds who would undoubtedly try to piece together what was now a chaotic crime scene.